Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Faith Unraveled. I'm Alicia. This is Jamie.
Hello.
We're going to be talking today about Mormon excommunication. And I think this is a timely topic.
Yeah, Nemo the Mormon is about he's going to a disciplinary council this next week, I believe, and most likely after that disciplinary council, he will be excommunicated. There's very few times where they're pulling you into a disciplinary council without knowing what the outcome is. My belief is.
Yeah, it's true. And Nemo is a personal friend of ours. We've gotten to hang out with Nemo in real life. We love him and we think he's doing good work. And the thing that I want to point out before we get into our discussion for today, we're going to talk about what excommunication is, what the process looks like, why people get excommunicated. But one overarching theme in so many of the recent public excommunications is that a lot of the people that are getting this disciplinary action where they're forced to no longer be members of the church is because they are pushing for change. And so many of these people are really fighting a good cause, something that Jesus would have most definitely been in support of. And that's what's so wild about it. Everything from historians to mental health care practitioners, a bishop in the church who wanted to see bishop worthiness interviews taken out of the protocol because there were so many kids being asked explicit questions by adults. He felt like this is a practice that should not be going on. Kids don't need to talk to a man in a room by themselves about their sexual worthiness. And he was excommunicated. Other people like Kate Kelly, who fought for women's equality in the church, people like John DeLynn, who are creating public platforms to literally help people as they were struggling with their faith. And excommunication process is just another reminder that this is a high demand religion that requires certain very specific adherence. And if you step out of line, and most importantly, if you challenge the church, if you call out the church, if you give the church any kind of bruising to their name, they're going to come after you. If you have a high enough profile, they're going to come after you.
September 6th in
1993, I think.
Yeah, it was at 93. They excommunicated 6 people. They were all pretty much historians and BYU professors that were talking about things that didn't align with where the church wanted them to go. And so they excommunicated all 6 of those people. And some of them never got rebaptized, even though they wanted to be rebaptized in the church. And so this is just a lever that they use, to me, that drives fear in people, so they will not talk about the issues in the church.
Yeah. And the part that I wanted to circle back to when you talk about people like Natasha Helfer and John DeLynn and Sam Young specifically is that the church does eventually come around to making the changes that these people were fighting for. So there was apparently some kind of amendment to the policy on worthiness interviews that kids could ask to have a parent present in the interview so that their child wasn't alone with the bishopric member during their chastity worthiness interview. And I don't think that change would have occurred without Sam Young. But instead of approaching this like, hey, we've taken into consideration the thoughts from Sam Young, like the church is in no way a democracy. And so they just excommunicated him. And here he had served as a bishop, and I was believing at one time.
Matter of fact, when you bring these things up to so the way that the church wants it to run is you take whatever issues you have to the bishop. If you're not getting satisfied, then you go to the stake president. And if you're not satisfied there, then you can go to the general authorities. But pretty much what happens is everybody lines up to their priesthood authority. So even though you might be taking stuff to them that are very controversial or very progressive in the church, they're shutting it down.
And you're saying questions about the doctrine or questions about a policy?
Questions about the doctrine or questions about the policy. And their way of handling that is just shutting it down right away. So what these people have done is they've used their platform to challenge some of the policies or challenge the doctrine that the church has brought forward. And without this challenge, you don't get change.
Exactly.
And so, because they'll continue to operate as if, like what they did like 100 years ago.
Oh, yeah. It absolutely takes noisemakers for the church to make change. And that's why a lot of people are really confident that at some point LGBTQ people will be able to get sealed in the temple, because there have been so many changes that the church has made. That's a topic for a totally different episode. But the church does eventually make changes. They do eventually yield to the criticisms. But it generally takes people getting excommunicated along the way.
So let's talk about what is excommunication in the church. And then once you're excommunicated, what happens to your record?
The way that you function within the church, like the things that you're able to do, are dependent on what standing you are in the church. So even just to give a sacrament meeting talk, you have to be a member in good standing. To give a prayer in class, you have to be a member in good standing.
Which makes sense. Like if you have someone that has committed murder, right? I don't know if you really want him to be up front talking. So I do think there is a place for excommunication, but they use it as a scare and fear tactic for people who are progressive and challenging policies or challenging the history of the church. And that's where I believe it becomes very archaic and very like I'll say mean toward the people who do not align with where the church is going. They believe in the church that there's one true truth, right? And that the prophet dictates that truth.
And it's coming directly from God.
And it's coming directly from God.
And it's not something to be challenged in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So as a member of the church, I just always felt like everything that I did in the church was instituted by God. And that went all the way down to the callings that I received. If I got called to work in the nursery, I believed that God wanted me in the nursery because my bishop has the ability to receive revelation for me. So because this church is run on a local level by all volunteers, nobody's paid, there's no paid clergy unless you're in the general presidency of the men who are in the general presidency of the church. I don't think the women get paid, do they?
I don't know. The general authorities.
If anyone knows the answer to that question, could you put it in the comments? I would love to know if the women
get
in
paid.
The general presidencies are paid. I think it's
you
only.
Would hope so.
I think it's only the apostles.
No, the 70s you do. They quit their jobs.
Please, someone tell us if you know the answer to this question.
Yeah.
But for all the local leadership, everything is run by members. And what that means is that your primary classes are taught by members of the church to children as young as 18 months old. So they have to make sure that all of their members are in good standing.
So there has to be some type of boundaries that the church puts in place. And so I do believe there's a place for excommunication, but the church has taken it way too far. And I believe they use it as a tool to stop the progressive thought and to put fear into those people who want to be vocal about certain things around the church. They don't want their good name to be smeared. I think their good name is more important than anything else. It's more important than the person itself.
Yeah. One thing I just wanted to interject here real quick is that as a member of the church, I would have been really happy about this practice because I wouldn't want someone who is a predator being in contact with my children. The interesting thing about this is that I will say that it is my observation that predators are very often not handled as aggressively as critics of the church.
Yeah.
I've been in stakes where known predators were still showing up at stake conference to sing in the choir. And you better believe that they were going to the bathroom with no supervision, nobody escorting them to the restroom and waiting for them. But then we see people like Sam Young who are literally fighting for children. To improve the safety measures for children within the church, and they're getting excommunicated.
Yeah, so part of the excommunication process too is if you are going to go through that, they'll have a disciplinary court. If it's a woman, that court will probably be with the bishop. If it's a man, they take it a step higher and they go with the stake presidency at that point in time. And it used to be the stake presidency with all the high council. They have now reduced it, I think, to just the stake presidency. They've made some changes with the court. And I'm assuming it's because of a lot of the media attention they've been getting around these excommunications of certain individuals, where I think they've changed it because they don't want some of the stuff going out.
Yeah, I feel very sad thinking about friends that we have who've been excommunicated. Just thinking back through that, a close friend of ours who was excommunicated shortly after she came out of the closet as gay. And I don't know if there was anyone there for her. They're able to take an advocate with them, someone to stand beside them and vouch for them. And that was one of the rougher days for my friend.
Yeah, you're kind of defending yourself. You're supposed to be up there defending yourself and why you shouldn't be. And they're supposed to be following the spirit on whether or not they're going to excommunicate you.
And they as far as I know, you're given 30 minutes or somewhere around that time frame to speak, and you can say something.
And you can bring in what other people want to say about you too, to defend wherever your stance is at that point in time.
I mean, she continued to go and take her kids. She had kids who went on missions.
And they say this is a loving process, by the way. It's a humiliation process.
Who said it felt like being raped by Care Bears.
That's pretty descriptive, by
I
the way.
mean, like, really think about that.
Yeah.
It's just like performative niceness, but it's just absolutely cruel, especially in a situation like that with
Yeah.
our friend.
Well, that's where I believe the excommunication process is a tool to harm individuals.
And they'll say it's to
For love.
complete the
Yeah.
repentance process.
And maybe it is for someone who committed murder, but where I feel like it goes way beyond that's when you start attacking someone who's had sex outside the bonds of marriage. Like,
right.
So
ridiculous.
Yeah. So you have a divorce that has happened, and you have a man or a woman who's living single, and then they end up having sex with someone that they're dating. There's a good chance you can be excommunicated for that.
I have a friend, and she was divorced in her 50s. She had been married twice. And when she went in to get approved for a new temple ceiling, the bishop asked her if she pleasured herself. And she more or less said, well, I mean, I'm 55 years old and I've been married twice. And he put her in a disfellowshipping for that. I mean, it's just wild.
This is where it's archaic.
And he said to her, every sin that you have committed has come back, because that's the belief. Like, let's say you've gone through the repentance process for having extramarital relations. And so you've repented for that, but then you do it again later. The idea that's taught in the church is the impacts of this sin come back from even previous sins, even ones that go all the way back into childhood. And I don't know, it's just
it's
brutal.
because they're taking away your baptismal covenants, and those baptismal covenants wash away and cleanse yourself from all sin.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets like people going through this process. It's a harsh process to go through. I know a number of people that get rebaptized later on, but I can't imagine going through that process, especially for just being vocal about, problems within the church.
Absolutely.
That they eventually change later down the road. Was there ever a time that you could have been excommunicated, do you think?
They don't usually excommunicate youth. I don't think they can excommunicate a youth. Can they?
I don't know.
I've
I've never seen it before.
But when I went into the bishop at 15 to talk to him about what I had done with my boyfriend, he told me that I was going to have an unofficial disfellowshipping, which I believe meant that it wasn't going to go on my permanent record. But how terrible for a youth to think what I'm doing is second only to offing someone. I mean, that's literally what I thought about myself. But no, there hasn't been anything. Well, yes, talking publicly about the church, I could very well have been excommunicated, but I removed my name before that could happen.
Yeah, I do think Alicia could have been excommunicated based upon how vocal she's been over TikTok, and she has now a 75,000 person following. Before she removed her names, I think I wouldn't be surprised if they had conversations like, "What do we do about Alicia?" Like, I know she's and she has broken a lot of shelves for people, where they have started deconstructing because of her. So the church could see her as, an adversary to that good name of the church. So,
do you want to talk about some of the people that have been excommunicated?
Yeah.
We talked about John Dehlin. John was excommunicated for starting
Mormon
basically
Stories.
an online community to help people with their faith.
What John went through is similar to what we both went through. As we saw contradictions to the church, he couldn't believe it. He was, I think, in his late 20s or early 30s when
teaching seminary.
Yeah, and when he found this stuff, and so then he started building a platform. Mormon Stories was that platform, and started interviewing people. And I think he really wanted to stay in the church, but he wanted change within the church. The church then excommunicated him because of his platform that he developed. Do you want to go to the next one, Jeremy Reynolds?
Jeremy Reynolds was actually not excommunicated, from my understanding.
Well, I think he went through a bishop's or a stake president disciplinary council, and I think he saw the writing on the wall at the very end and just said, "Hey, here's my resignation." He turned in his resignation.
Sometimes a bishop won't take a resignation,
and they might have not
if they want to excommunicate you. A lot of people have posted about that I've seen in various groups. I wanted to resign, and the bishop said, "We're going to call you in for disciplinary counsel instead."
Yeah.
That's when you've got to go through quitmormon.org. So just know that the bishop is not your only way to resign.
Well, but the quitmormon.org has to go, and the church still might put an excommunication on their record. I wouldn't be surprised if they did that. And so another one was Bill Rill, and this one was very impactful to me. Did
you by chance listen to his interview with John where they recapped the disciplinary council? Very interesting.
Well, someone pushed record and put it into one of his.
And it wasn't
pocket.
him.
It wasn't him that did that. And they taped the whole disciplinary council. So if someone wants to see a good disciplinary council and how it went and how frustrating it was, I mean, he did a really good job of laying the issues that he has with the church and how the narrative has changed and how the church is harmful. And I honestly thought he did a really good job of describing it, and they didn't care one bit. They were going to excommunicate him no matter what.
Can I tell you what that reminded me of?
What did it remind you?
King Noah and Abinadi. I'm like, there's got to be someone in that room who's listening to him going, oh, he's speaking truth. I mean, this is absolutely compelling.
That scared me as I was deconstructing. It was like the first few months of like, I started deconstructing in January 2020. Well, started in 2008, but really 2020. And I think I hit that Mormon story like in March, and it really scared me because I didn't want my record removed. And so then you become isolated and you're like, who do I talk to about it? I talk to anybody about this. I could be excommunicated. I talked to my bishop and said, hey, I'm not comfortable like talking about this stuff. Like I feel like you could excommunicate me if I talk about it. I gave examples. I talked about Leah and Cody Young and what the situation in Ohio was on that. And I said, and he told me like, Jamie, I'm not going to excommunicate you. I'm not going to excommunicate you.
Good guy.
He was a really good guy. But that fear coming from Bill Rill's excommunication, like I can't talk about this stuff.
Yeah. My mom was afraid to talk about it too. Fawn Brody, that's another one we didn't list.
Yeah.
Fawn Brody, she's the niece of David O. McKay and had access to some of the archives. And so she was able to write a book called No Man Knows My History and publish it. And it was all kinds of just the real story of Joseph Smith's life. And she was excommunicated, right?
Yep, she was excommunicated.
We've got Kate Kelly, who frontiered the
Women in the
Ordained
priesthood.
Women movement. Natasha Helfer, I will never forget, Natasha Helfer wrote on her Facebook that not once during her disciplinary council was she asked if she believed. She was teaching that the shame that the church imposes on things like self-pleasure, especially for children, is very harmful. And as someone who has devoted her adult life to studying psychology and human development, she is a person that has professional guidelines.
Yeah. Well, and this is also the problem that Julie Hanks is starting to have with some of the members. They're starting to report her when she is just trying to be
talking about things like why it's not good to shame girls about modesty or blame girls for the improper thoughts of boys. I mean, these are such good messages that these women are coming to the table with, these experts who know what's best from a human development perspective or from a psychological perspective. And instead of the church embracing that, the
prophet knows everything.
Natasha.
Remember that the prophet has a direct line to God. And so that trumps all the knowledge that's out there.
Right. It trumps psychology. It trumps
science.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So.
Okay. So then we've got the September 6th. And that is referring to in the early 90s, there were, we mentioned this before, but there was a handful of scholars that were excommunicated for just pointing out
they were
truth.
BYU professors, and some of them were teaching about like Heavenly Mother. They excommunicated someone because they were talking about Heavenly Mother. There was D. Michael Quinn that was part of that. There was a number of people, 6 people that were professors that didn't align with necessarily the church's teachings, but it wasn't like they were opposing it and going out there and advocating against it. Not like I would say we're not advocating against it. We're just trying to be transparent, but we're even more than what we were, much less than what we were doing.
I mean, these were people that were attending their meetings.
Yes.
They were actively involved in the church. They had callings. They worked for the church, and they were not maliciously opposing the church like we are.
We're being probably more vocal than they were. At the time.
And then we can't forget all of the LGBTQ people that have been excommunicated
for just living their life.
Strictly just for being gay.
Yeah.
Or strictly just for being trans. So this new generation of LGBT kids that are coming up in the church.
Do you think it's a safer environment today?
I don't think I would use the word safer, because sometimes I think when you make things look better from the surface, they're actually more dangerous because they're going to be less likely to break out when it seems like, oh, we love you. We're not going to excommunicate you. But then what's their life inside the church going to look like?
Yep. Nemo the Mormon.
Nemo the Mormon, our friend Doug, his platform is calling the church out on bad behavior, calling out when the church has been dishonest, calling out problematic policies. And if you recall, there was a situation in Texas where Fairview, the town of Fairview, was attempting to build a temple. And there was a big problem with the city because this gargantuan building is going to take up a lot of space. And the height of the steeple was obscene to a lot of the people in the town. They
It
didn't
didn't
want
even
this.
align with the permitting that was part of that area.
Right. And members of the church were coming to this meeting and they were basically fibbing to get the city to move in their direction. And so what the city was looking for was, is there something in your religious belief that says how high this building needs to be? And there isn't, but people were saying, yes,
It's
you know.
not. And there's multiple temples that they don't have steeples that high.
Right.
And this is where
Well, look at the Mesa, Arizona temple.
Yeah, this is where the arrogance of the church comes in, to where all they had to do was change the plans of the temple and lower, or not even put in that steeple, and it still could have a temple there. But they were so arrogant in the way they were dealing with it that they weren't going to give up on that steeple. And so Nemo went out, and because it's part of the public and the public can comment at the city council meeting, that's exactly what he did. He was very vocal that she didn't need to have a steeple, and he was totally right. He
is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So he's able to say, as a member, I'm telling you that this is not part of our doctrine. Yeah. It's not stipulated in the doctrine. And I'd love to play the clip from that.
And maybe you should.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll play the clip right here.
My name is Douglas Stilgo, and I've traveled here from Oxford, England. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm a graduate of the Church's seminary program. I'm a returned missionary, and I'm also the UK's leading commentator on the Church. There are 3 simple points that need to be made here, particularly in response to the claim being made that the height of the steeple is part of our religious observance. 1, temples do not need a steeple. 2, the steeple does not have to be a certain height. And 3, architectural design is secondary to the temple's primary purpose. The church currently has 199 temples that are either operating, being refurbished, or awaiting dedication. All of these are equal in their value to Latter-day Saint worship. They all provide access to the same covenants and ordinances. And there are several prominent examples of temples with no steeple at all. Mesa, Arizona, Cardston, Alberta, Leh, Hawaii, and most recently, Paris, France. Of those temples that do have a steeple, the shortest is just 54 feet in Freiburg, Germany. In fact, almost 90% of the church's temples have a steeple shorter than what is being proposed here in Fairview at 173 feet and 8 inches. It is eminently acceptable to the church in almost 90% of cases to have a steeple shorter than what they're asking for here in Fairview. The shortest temple the church has ever built is the Paris, France temple at just 42 feet tall with no spire, no steeple. Yet it has a square footage of 44,175 square feet, the same as the proposed temple in Fairview. Steeple height, therefore, cannot be argued by square footage. And speaking of the Paris, France temple, presiding bishop of the church, Gérard Corset, said, "There are a number of constraints that we have, the code that we have to respect. But in the end, it is only good because it makes for a temple that everybody accepts and recognizes as theirs." The presiding bishop of the LDS Church publicly declared that respect for planning code and constraints is a good thing because it makes for a temple that everybody accepts and recognizes as their own. Where is that attitude here? Furthering Bishop Corset's point, the church has said a temple's design, both internal and external, is secondary to its primary purpose. The prophet and president of the church, Russell M. Nelson, said more plainly in 2022, it's not the location, it's not the architecture, it's the ordinances inside. I've heard many claims that this steeple variance is required by LDS beliefs, and that's simply not the case. The president of the church has said otherwise. The actions of local leaders are not in harmony with the teachings of the prophet of the church. And I don't know why they're ignoring the plain teachings of the president of the church. But what I can say categorically is, as a member of this church, steeple height has never mattered. I have known throughout my entire membership of church that some temples have steeples and others do not. I think LDS Apostle David A. Bednar summarized it best in April 2023, just last year, when he said regarding temples, who cares what size it is if you have access to the same covenants and ordinances? And thank you very much.
Yeah, now he has a disciplinary council coming up, and my guess is it's a done deal that he's going to be excommunicated.
I wish they could record it.
It'd be interesting to see. If you want to see, for those who have never heard of or been in a disciplinary council, we will post a bill reel, and it will show you how problematic this council is.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well, that's it for today's episode. So go ahead and look for those links down in the comments and let us know your thoughts on this. What are your thoughts on excommunication? Is this something that should exist in a modern church? Is it simply a problem associated with the structure of the church and there's really no way to get around it with lay people running on a ward member level? Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Again, as always, we appreciate you joining us so much, and we love connecting with you. If you're listening on podcast, please consider writing a review. And if you're here on YouTube, please say hello. We'd love to hear from you. And also, as a side note, find us on Instagram. I'm always checking my DMs there, looking for new topics. And we're going to get into doing some interviews here as well. So if there's anyone that you would like to hear from, we're going to be interviewing people around the reconstruction process and what that looked like for you. So thanks so much for joining us today. We'll see you soon, guys.